Life is a gamble, we scramble for money. I might crack a smile, but ain't a damn thing funny. I'm caught up in the dirt where your hands get muddy.
Hello. Welcome back to yet another video, college football video. We're on a roll, and when I say finally, I mean finally, we have reached the end of these top 15 power rankings, which have took me several weeks and tens of hours. I have probably done this in the most inefficient way possible, which is why it took so long to complete, but I spared no expense. With that being said, allow me to show you the most eloquently put together title screen we have here. Oh, look at that right there. Goodness, yeah. Many hours went into that. Let's get right into it. I'm not holding y'all up. My number 5 team in the college football season. If you're not aware, just look back. I'm doing my top 15 teams, my personal opinions, what I think are the best teams in college football right now. Number 5, I have Washington, notably over teams such as Penn State, Alabama, Oregon, LSU, Florida State. Why do I have Washington at number 5? Well, let's take a look at what they did last season. They went 11-2, got as high as 8th in the, AP rankings, started the season unranked, and they racked off a 7-game win streak. Taking a deeper dive, we can look game by game. Opened up with a couple of cupcakes in which we began to see what their offense was capable of with 45 and 52 respectively. And then their big upset versus Michigan State. Michigan State obviously coming off their magical season from last year, including wins over Michigan. So a lot of hype for Michigan State early. Washington put into that. And we know what happened with Michigan State. Rest in peace to their season last year. But Washington with their first big win of the season over Michigan State, and then, putting the pause on Stanford in week 4. Then their first loss of the season as a top 15 team, losing to, at the time, an unranked UCLA. We, as a collective, hindsight being 2020, come to realize that UCLA had one of the best offenses in the country. So looking back, I could say confidently that that wasn't a bad loss, because UCLA, looking at this schedule, UCLA was probably the second best offense that Washington played last season. Giving 40 up to them. I mean, heck, USC also gave up 40 plus to UCLA, if I'm not mistaken. So not a horrible loss there. Arizona State was without a doubt the worst loss of their season. Arizona State, I think, fired their coach mid-season, if I'm correct there. Horrible loss. Horrible loss by Washington. Man, what could have changed if Washington would have pulled that win off? Man. But they didn't. Lost to Arizona State, coming off a loss. They became unranked. So what did they do? 49 points versus Arizona. Still the defense at this point. Look at what the Washington defense had did. 40, 45, 39. Not looking too hot if you're the Washington defense at that point. Then, close win versus Cal, followed by a close win versus a ranked Oregon State. One of their better wins of the season. The casuals amongst us would not recognize Oregon State as a very good team, but they won 10 games last season, and one of their only losses came to that Washington team. Then, their biggest win of the season, crushing Oregon's playoff hopes in a nighttime game, which was incredible. Close win down to the wire. They pulled that off, followed by a thumping of Colorado, as everybody did, to Colorado. And then, I think it's the Red Cup. What do they call it, that rivalry game? They beat Washington State, put up 51 points. And then in the Alamo Bowl, they beat Texas. Take that for what you will. I'm not sure who was playing on Texas' side, but a very, very strong finish if you're Washington to your season, big wins. Oregon State, Oregon, Texas, Michigan State early in the season. It was a good season. But again, the casuals amongst us would say, oh, no USC on the schedule, no Utah on the schedule, whatever. And they wouldn't be wrong. Washington certainly got lucky with their schedule draw last season. You could make the argument they should have gone 11-1. The Arizona State game was a big blemish, but nobody's perfect, and they have a ton of momentum going into this season. Taking a look at their team stats, what they were as a team, this may shock some of y'all, but they were the best passing offense in the country. Not Tennessee, not USC, Washington. Michael Penix in Washington was letting it rip 24/7. And that resulted in just not only the best passing offense in the country, but the second best offense just in general in the country behind Tennessee. Because they were also able to run the ball. You may look at 69th in the country and say, really, were they really able to run the ball? Yeah, they were. Because it wasn't, a dominating run game. It was complementary. And it fit their play style. And as you can see by the points scored per game down there, 39.7, it was very effective. Also helps when you just don't give up sacks. Michael Penix just didn't touch the ground last season. He stayed on his feet as much as anybody because they gave up half a sack a game, good enough for second best in the country. And which also, expectedly led to not a lot of turnovers. Top 10 in protecting the football, always a recipe for success. So look at all that right there. Guys, without a shadow of a doubt, nobody can really argue here that Washington was a top 5 offense in the country last season. The stats just show it for you right there. So, you just have a great base as far as jumping into next season, as far as we're going to get into it, not losing much of that group whatsoever. Taking a look at their defense, you may think Washington is in that same boat as USC, where it's just all offense, no defense. And this was their downfall at some points. They couldn't stop UCLA. They couldn't stop Arizona State. But when they needed to, they stopped teams like Michigan State, like Oregon, like Texas. So the defense, it's better than you may have thought. I'll point to a couple stats in particular. 21st in the country in getting after the quarterback, 2.85 sacks per game. That's good. That's a lot better. When we get to the top 3 teams in this video, hell, the best team in the country, that's better than that team. That team you're thinking of right now, yeah, they got more pressure than that team. 26th best in the country at stopping the run. Again, not what you would think from Pac-12 football. Even shocked me a little bit. I was not expecting them to be that good. Well, they were also 100th in the country in stopping the pass. Again, I've said it again. I'll say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. When you are scoring as much as Washington scores, the other team is expected to throw the ball a lot in order to try and match what you're doing in the game in order to catch up. So that's expected in a way, but they didn't take the ball away. That is the biggest thing holding Washington back, in my opinion. The reason they were at 5 and not any higher is because they really couldn't take the ball away like the teams we're going to get to in this video. Taking a look at their key losses, you may notice there weren't many. I was looking. I looked up and down their depth chart, and quite frankly, I thought Wayne Talapapa was staying. In research for this video, a couple days ago, I found out that he was no longer a Husky, and that is actually what dropped them. I had them at 4, above the team we're going to get to. When I found out they lost at 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, I had to knock them down a spot because, him on the team coming back for another year, it would have been too much, So it makes sense that he left because it also explained a big transfer player they got in the running back room. But that was their biggest loss by a mile. Other notable guys, Jeremiah Martin, 8.5 sacks last season, one of their better pass rushers. Alex Cook in the secondary, 82 tackles. Taj Davis, a depth receiver, transferred, I believe. So, quite frankly, if I'm being perfectly honest here, out of every single team I've done so far, top 15 and what we're going to get to, Washington lost the least. Again, starting running back, premier pass rusher, safety. It's not nothing. It's something. It certainly is something, but it is the least amount of loss of any team I've seen that I've covered so far in any video. That is a massive component. I don't think you guys understand. Replacing talent, when you're a top program, it seems easy. It's not easy whatsoever. The reason I have Washington over a team like Alabama. Look at what just take it. I'll link the video. I'll put a little thing up you'll see in the top corner. You can go back to the Alabama video. Look at what they lost compared to what Washington lost. It's not even close. So when I look at a team that brings back all their production and a team that lost over half their production, who do you think I'm going to favor? Who do you think I'm going to give the nod to? In this case, it's Washington. let's take a look at that offense. The top 5 offense, the best passing offense in the country. Obviously, it's led by Michael Penix. In my opinion, the third best quarterback in the country, a Heisman should be one of the Heisman favorites. Besides Caleb Williams, I'd probably have Michael Penix right there at number 2. Um, I mean, the stats speak for themselves. He led the country in passing yards, I believe. It's just, and not just that. Let's take a look at the first before we know about the receivers. Let's take a look at the running back one. I mentioned Wayne Talapapa left to the NFL. My Seahawks picked him up for training camp. Cameron Davis returning. Their best returning running back had had 13 touchdowns, 659 total yards. You expect him to be the primary runner. First and second down, you need 4 or 5 yards. Cameron Davis gets the ball. However, Dillon Johnson, transferring in from Mississippi State, played in the air raid offense, very capable as a catcher out of the backfield. They bring him in on third down looks, adds a new layer to that offense. Keep an eye on him. This duo, I think, is more than enough to match their production from last season. Keep in mind, they weren't a great running team. They were 69th in the country. Do I think they could be 64th, 65th this year for slight improvement? Certainly. To mention the receiving room, I think it is, if you don't consider this the best in the country, it's top 3 undeniably. Worst I'd give is top 4, and I wouldn't give it top 4. Me personally, I give this top 3. Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan will both most likely be first-round picks. They both had over 1,100 total yards last season. They combined for 17 touchdowns, and they're coming back. They could have left last year and been NFL draft picks in the first couple of rounds. They're returning both of them. And then Ja'Lynn Polk, over 700 yards. Ja'Lynn Polk, what really makes a wide receiver room deadly is if that wide receiver 3 could start as the number 1 for 90% of teams, that's what really takes it to another level. And that's what they have in Ja'Lynn Polk. Over 700 yards and 6 touchdowns for him last season. And let's take a look at the depth. Giles Jackson, nearly 400 yards out on his own last season. Jack Westover at the tight end position, over 300 yards, 31 catches. Jeremy Bernard averaging, like 15 yards a catch last season in a limited role. And then Josh Cuevas transferring in from a smaller school. He himself had over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. I'm not sure how much he's going to be involved, but just adding weapons. I mean, they lost Taj Davis, lost Wayne Talapapa, but I think we are looking at a top 5 offense in college football, which improved. How many teams can you say that about? Not many. It's such a unique situation they have at Washington. And to take a look at the defense, I already mentioned how they were really good, really surprisingly good at getting after the quarterback. I think we're going to see more of the same. I point specifically to Braylon Trice down there on the left-hand side as the edge rusher. 9 sacks for him last season. Take a look at all these guys. Voy Tunufi. First of all, they got a lot of Pacific Islanders being like a West Coast team. So I'm not even going to try on a couple of these names, but 5 sacks, 4.5 sacks, 3 sacks. Their front 7 is very interesting. Raylan Goforth on the right-hand side there, transfer in from USC to strengthen the linebacking core. They took a loss there, I believe. So improving there. Jabbar Muhammad transfer in at the cornerback position. 9 passes defended for him. The secondary is, I wouldn't call it a weakness, but in comparison to their front 7, it is weaker. So they struggled to stop the pass last season. Getting after the quarterback similarly to what they did last season will help that. But defensively, I don't see a massive jump here. I just think if they're going to win more games than they did last season and win more close games, they play USC this year. They play Oregon again. They need to just be better situationally. They need to force more turnovers, and I think they have the personnel for that. I think Washington, the key for them is a returning production. Being, in my opinion, a top 3 offense in the country with a good defense, a better defense than you could call with their contemporaries in the Pac-12. That's what makes them a top 5 team in my eyes. Moving on to number 4. It says 5. My dumbass. I couldn't even check and see. USC. is my number 4. Why do I have USC over Washington? Well, they are so evenly matched, and some of their stats are so eerily similar. They play the game in a very alike manner. I gave USC the edge because you look at the quarterback position, slight, and I emphasize that, slight edge to Caleb Williams. I think the running back room overall, again, with the loss of Wayne Talapapa, I would have edged Washington. Now I edge USC. Receiver room, USC is slightly deeper. I think at the top, I think Washington has 2 number 1 receivers. I think USC has 1. But the depth, I would slightly edge USC. In the defensively, quite frankly, it was their ability to take the football away. USC also won 11 games last season, made an appearance in the Pac-12 championship. They were a top-ranked team the entire season. But quickly, let me just point your eyes to the bottom right of the screen right there. 29 takeaways. Would you believe me if this trash USC defense had the 5th most takeaways in the country last season? Because this shocked me when I first found this out a while ago. But 29 takeaways, guys. And I'm kind of doing this in reverse order. I usually take a look at the games played first. But look at the right-hand side there. They turned the ball over the least in the country. And they took the ball away 5th most in the country. That's a recipe for success. I mean, it just is. Let's take a look on the left at their cupcake schedule. Wow. Okay, let me chill. What the hell was that? My fault. Let me unpause my screen sharing, I think. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, taking a look at their schedule, what they did last season. They had Rice to open the season. That was a shocking win there, pulled off by USC, followed by Stanford and Fresno State. Again, their offense shined. They picked apart weak defensive competition in the Pac-12. Then, looking to Oregon State, what they did, again, similar to Washington, we did not know at the time, but Oregon State was a very good team, especially on the defensive side of the football. That was a close win. USC's offense struggled like it did not struggle against anybody else in the entire season, but they pulled off a close win, their first real scare of the season. More dominating wins versus Arizona and Washington State, respectively. And then, obviously, Utah with the major upset. Amazing game, came down to the wire. USC's offense, obviously not to blame, but we will see a trend of USC losing because their defense cannot hold the opposing good offense to less than 40 points. That was their first major loss of the season. But they rallied back, rattled off 3 wins against subpar competition, Arizona, California, and Colorado, and then 2 very good ranked wins that I don't feel like get talked about enough. UCLA, they did what Washington could not do and outscored UCLA, even though their defense couldn't do a damn thing. 48 points versus UCLA, got that win. Notre Dame, keep in mind, this Notre Dame game, this is when Notre Dame was rocking. They had already beat Clemson up to this point handedly, and USC, shout out to their defense, held them to under 30, and the offense went to work. That was an easy win versus probably their best win of the season. I'll call it that. That was their best win of the season. And then, obviously, the Pac-12 championship, we know what happened. They got exposed. Utah just dusted them off, even worse than the first go-around. You can say Caleb Williams was injured, but I mean, he still had like over 300 yards, and he played the whole game. So how hurt was he really? I'm not really buying all that. But hey, a loss is a loss. They ate that one. And then they got embarrassed in the Cotton Bowl. They lost to Tulane. All respect to the Green Wave, but I'm not sure anybody was picking Tulane to pick up the win there. But they did, because for the 3rd time that season, USC's defense against top competition was Swiss cheese. That has to change for USC to maintain some type of high ranking here for me. Let's see if they can do it based off who they lost. Taking a look at their key losses. Starting offensively, we have Travis Dye, Jordan Addison. Those were two of their top weapons. Travis Dye being their number one running back from last season, over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. He went down at some point. I don't think he played in the Pac-12 championship. But losing him is big. They brought in transfers to replace him, but they did lose their number one running back, similar to Washington. Jordan Addison again dealt with injuries, but he was their number one receiver. But a similar story. USC did bring somebody in to possibly even upgrade at that position. A couple receivers. Kyle Ford left due to just insane competition. He transferred out. Gary Bryant, those were his stats in 2021, by the way. He transfers out to Oregon, I believe. And then Andrew Voorhees, first team All-American selection, interior offensive lineman, first team All Pac-12 as well. He goes to the NFL. Taking a look at the defense, well, we got four members of the front seven here. Tuli apologize for the name here. Tuli Tuipulotu, their best defensive player last season. Just take a look at the fucking stats here. I don't know why this guy wasn't getting more hype around the NFL draft. He went in the third round to the Chargers, maybe second round. 22 tackles for a loss and 13 and a half sacks. Like, what the fuck? That guy was a monster. For USC, a massive loss. They are going to need to do a lot in order to replace that production because it was massive. Not even to mention Nick Figueroa, 5.5 sacks on his end. So there it goes, 19 sacks, just walking out the door. And then taking a look at Mekhi Blackman, their best DB from last season. 12 passes defended for him, 3 interceptions. So they lost their starting running back, their number one wide receiver, you could argue, their best offensive lineman, their best defensive lineman, and their best DB. So a lot to make up for here, a lot of work to be done by USC this offseason. Let's see what they did. Let's look at the new and improved offense for the Trojans. Obviously, Caleb Williams returns at quarterback. Heisman winner, the favorite to win it again back-to-back. I think that's incredibly likely. If they're giving it to the best player in college football every year, Caleb Williams will probably win it again. I have no doubt about that. I've said he's the best quarterback in college football. Let's just leave it at that because we already know that. Taking a look at the running back room. Austin Jones, Marshawn Lloyd, transfer in from South Carolina, hopefully to replace the loss of Travis Dye. However, I think Austin Jones is going to be the number one. He has experience already in the system, nearly 1,000 yards from scrimmage last season. But take a look at Marshawn Lloyd as well, 11 touchdowns in the SEC. Certainly a nice tandem there. And then the athlete, Raleek Brown, he could play anywhere. He could play a receiver. Just get him the ball. When he gets the ball in his hands, he's dangerous. Over 400 yards from scrimmage last season. You look for him to get the ball just in whatever way possible. Tight end Lake McCree. Tight ends were not heavily involved in this offense last season. Let's take a look at the strength of this team. The deepest receiving corps in the country. I have no problem saying that. Starting off, the Jordan Addison replacement. We'll call it what it is. Dorian Singer from Arizona to USC. 1,100 yards last season, 6 touchdowns. Do I call him one of the most important players in college football? Because he has the opportunity to just pick apart every defense he plays next season. I am very afraid to watch the duo of Caleb Williams and Dorian Singer because I think he could be better than Jordan Addison. If not from a talent standpoint, certainly from a statistical standpoint. He was already, what was that, 200 more yards than Addison had last season, and that's not playing with Caleb Williams. I'm concerned. Jerry Rice's son, Brendan Rice, that just blew my mind when I found that out. If you're already a hardcore college football fan, you knew that already. But, pardon me for not knowing that Jerry Rice had a son playing at USC. But yeah, Brandon Rice, 600 yards last season. Mario Williams, 631 yards last season. Taj Washington, 800 yards last. I mean, guys, their wide receiver four could be a starter, not just a starter, the number one for 80% of college football teams, easily, maybe 85%. Nobody else has depth like this. And then they got a guy, Michael Jackson, who had over 300 yards last season. Okay, we know this offense is deadly. We know it's one of the best passing offenses in the country. Their ability to run the ball, though, between Caleb Williams, Austin Jones, Marshawn Lloyd, it's just how do you stop the USC offense? You don't. And they lost 3 games last season, and in 2 of those games they scored 40+ points. So this offense is not going to be slowed down by many teams. I don't think it's going to be stopped by anybody. Defensively, we all know, there's no need to beat around the bush. If they're not there defensively, they're going to have the exact same result as last season and miss the college football playoff. So, what did they do? Who did they bring in? What are the players to look out for? Well, in the front seven, Bear Alexander transferring in from UGA would have been a starter for them in the interior of that defensive line. And we know that USC could not stop the run. I showed you the stats earlier. They need to do better. Jamil Muhammad, another transfer in linebacker, 5 tackles for a loss for him last season. It's just, you can't do any worse than what they had last season, respectfully. If you could find a guy who was good on another team, he was probably better than what the USC had in the front seven. So, Jamil Muhammad, Bear Alexander, Tyrone Taleni had 5 sacks on his own last season. Mason Cobb returning, probably the best player in their front seven, along with Shane Lee. 20.5 tackles for a loss between the two of them, also 5.5 sacks. Their front seven, their linebacking core has all of a sudden become a strength. Not to mention Eric Gentry, top right corner of your screen, 71 tackles for him. And then secondary, I mentioned the loss of Mekhi Blackmon. What do they have left? Well, let's take a look at Kalen Ballard. 5 interceptions for him last season. Bryson Shaw, 50 tackles and 4 passes defended. Christian Wallace, 6 passes defended. Max Williams, nearly 80 tackles, 5 passes defended. The USC defense, it has to be better. They have the talent to not be close to what they were last season. They don't have to be Georgia. They don't have to be Michigan. They don't have to be Ohio State. They have to be Washington. Washington is an example that a Pac-12 team can be a respectable defense. USC has all the talent in the world. They need to figure out how to slow teams down because their offense is capable of averaging 50 points a game, quite frankly. They need to just not lose games defensively. And, they have it set. They have it made. There was a clear path for them to make the playoff and win the national championship. But transitioning into the top 3. What separates the top 3 from the 2 we just covered? Quite simply, it's defense. Washington had a respectable defense and a great offense. USC, great offense, horrible defense. Every team from this point forward will have, at bare minimum, a very good defense. We know what Ohio State was last season. Amazing against everybody except Michigan. And that includes the game against Georgia. That college football semifinal game was the national championship. On this channel, that is how we refer to that game. It was an amazing national championship, and Ohio State came, 1 field goal away from winning it. They were ranked as high as 2, as low as 4. That's their range. 2 to 4 is what they were ranked last season. They started off on an 11-game win streak, and they lost back-to-back games. Taking a look at that, do I even need to break it down? I will, of course. Opening the season against Notre Dame, was Notre Dame ranked too highly to start the season? Of course. Did they play Ohio State respectively close in hindsight? Yeah, they did. A pretty impressive game on Notre Dame's part, even though they only put up 10 points. Ohio State coming out the gate a little slow. That was quickly overrun with their set of games. I mean, let's just run it down. 45 against Arkansas State, 77 versus Toledo, and then let's get into conference play and what they did to their conference opponents. What's supposed to be the good teams in the Big Ten West, Wisconsin gave up 52. Iowa, one of the best defenses in the country, gave up 54, 49 versus Rutgers and Michigan State. Okay, fuck me. Penn State played them very close. I watched the game, came down to the wire. The final score is double digits. A couple boneheaded mistakes by Penn State, a couple amazing plays by Ohio State won them that game. That game was very close, but they edged it out. Two good wins against what I consider to be top 15 teams, Notre Dame and Penn State. Northwestern Indiana, pretty uneventful stretch there. Maryland was actually pretty close. Shout out to Maryland. Interesting team to keep an eye on for this season. We know what happened versus Michigan. Michigan came to town and ran for 987 yards on Ohio State. And Ohio State didn't have an answer all game. The meme, Donovan's still running. It was hard to watch. Well, if you're an Ohio State fan, I mean, for me, it was hard to watch. I mean, just to watch a team get physically dominated like Ohio State did, it was tough. But then they flipped the script. They got their chance. They snuck in to the college football playoff and put on a classic, a master class performance. CJ Stroud played the best game of his career against Georgia, and it wasn't enough. They came up just short. So now, back to the drawing board. What do? Let's take a look at what they can look back on from last season and say were their strengths. Well, certainly a top 10 offense in the country. Ninth in yards in just yards in total. Second best scoring offense, 44 points per game. Did not give up any pressure. CJ Stroud sacked less than once a game on average. 10 turnovers in 14 games, I think. No, 13 games, I think. Yeah, 13 games. Fifth best in the country. A balanced offense. 32nd in rushing, 14th in passing. Defensively, I don't know how you could say this wasn't a top, 25 offense, 14th in total yards, 321 per game. 26th against the pass, 25th against the run, 25th scoring defense. They did not get as much pressure as, Washington, for example, but still 35th in the country, respectable, and they didn't take the ball away as much as you would probably expect. But still, a great offense and a balanced defense. They just could not win the big game, really, against Georgia. They could have lost to Michigan, beat Georgia. They were this close, guys, this close. But this is a very different Ohio State team. Let's get into why. We all know they lost CJ Stroud. All the talk has been about that and about what has resulted from that with the quarterback battle. However, I would argue the more important loss, well, I wouldn't say more important, but the less talked about loss is that Ohio State's offensive line has been decimated. I mentioned how they gave up less than a sack a game. Let's take a look. You lose your left tackle, Paris Johnson, 0 QB hits allowed. Top 10 pick in the NFL. You lose your right tackle, DeJuan Jones, 0 QB hits, 0 sacks allowed. NFL. You lose your center, 13 games played, no QB hits allowed. NFL. How the hell do you replace that in one season, one off season? Quite frankly, you don't. They brought in transfer players. I'm not going to get into them. By all accounts, they'll be sufficient. Their offensive line will be stable, but it will not be what CJ Stroud had. Whoever the new quarterback is, he will not be as protected. He will not be as comfortable. He will not be as safe as CJ Stroud was last season. That is what's not being talked about with the Buckeyes, and it's a massive, massive problem that they need to address come, the time the season rolls around. Taking a look at the defensive line, I already talked about how they didn't get much pressure. Well, they're losing Zach Harrison and Javonte Jean-Baptiste. 7.5 sacks combined between them. That's a lot when you're a team who doesn't get a bunch of pressure from one guy in particular. Also, losing two members of your secondary to the NFL, Cam Brown and Ronnie Hickman. Ohio State has some work to do in replacing that defense. First, let's take a look at the offense. Who is going to be the quarterback. I don't know. I mean, I went on Ohio State fan page today, the day of this video. It's fucking 5 a.m. But I went up to an Ohio State fan page to try and just see. I wanted to just have one guy here so to talk about for their quarterback battle. They were arguing. Today it's August. Ohio State fans are arguing over who the quarterback is going to be. Not who they think it's going to be. They have no clue about who the quarterback should be or is going to be. If I had to bet money, it would be Kyle McCord, but I'm not sure. I have no clue. And Ohio State fans don't have a clue. So that is just something that, you know, when a lot of people say that they just have the weapons. Their offense is so good that whoever it is going to come in and produce. That may be true. But when you're not sure in August and the offensive line, as I mentioned, is not what it once was, there's going to be some problems, quite frankly. Taking a look at what they do have. Running back room, incredibly deep. Incredibly deep. Miyan Williams, TreVeyon Henderson, Dallin Hayden. All extremely capable, all providing a good balance. They all have different skill sets. And I think they should and will lean more heavily on that run game because they can. When you're bringing back this much talent and you have an inexperienced quarterback, whoever it's going to be, you should rely more heavily on the run game. And thankfully for Ohio State, they're capable of that this year. How willing are they going to be? To be determined. We will see. We already know what they have in the receiver room. Certainly, you could make the case this is the best receiver room, certainly the best receiver tandem, two-man tandem in the nation. Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, both will be first-round picks next season. Probably both will be top 20 picks next season because they're that talented. Marvin Harrison Jr. could play in the NFL right now and probably be a Pro Bowler. Emeka Egbuka over 1,200 yards last season with 12 touchdowns. Not to mention guys like Cade Stover, a more than reliable tight end, over 400 yards from him. And then Julian Fleming, wide receiver 3, what I mentioned earlier with Jalen Polk. Having a wide receiver 3 that can pick apart defenses and take advantage takes a receiver room to a whole other level. That's what Julian Fleming does for the Buckeyes. Certainly, we expect if the quarterback they don't have to be C.J. Stroud because they're not going to be C.J. Stroud. They're not going to be Justin Fields. We are so used to seeing an Ohio State team with a Heisman level quarterback that the future is uncertain, but there is a clear path. Run the football heavily, play action, rely heavily on your star receivers, and protect the football. That's all Ohio State needs to do, and they can still be a top 15, maybe even a top 10 offense this season. Defensively, I got a lot of players here because they got a lot of talent. The word on the street is Ohio State's defense is going to be better than we've seen in a long time. Am I buying that? Am I drinking the Kool-Aid? A little bit. JT apologize. JT made a lot of plays last season. Made a lot of winning plays last season. A lot of eyes are on him to take over and be the dominant first-round pick of this front seven. Jack Sawyer, 4.5 sacks last season, might have led the team, I believe. Linebacking core. Tommy Etchenberg, probably the leader of this defense with 120 goddamn tackles and 12 tackles for a loss. Steel Chambers with his 77 tackles. Taking a look at the secondary, whether it's their own developed players or transfer players in. 5-pass defender for Denzel Burke. 5-pass defender for Davison. 3-pass defender, 3 interceptions for Jahad Carter, transferring from Syracuse. Lathan Ransom, over 74 tackles, 3.5 tackles for a loss. This team should be able to stop the run and stop the pass. That's a good combination. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not a head coach. I can tell you that's probably going to win you some games. They have versatility. They have depth. They have top-level stars defensively. They have everything they need. And this is I forgot the coordinator's name from Oklahoma State that they got last season. This is his second season. I expect this defense to take strides. It was already a good defense. I mentioned it was probably top 25. You could make an argument. It will be top 10. If Ohio State has a top 10 defense, that's very, very scary. The only two things holding this team back are the big steps backwards at quarterback and offensive line. Across the board, everywhere else, they're championship level. Let's see if they can put it together. Taking a look, my number 2 team, I think quite easily. I don't know how you could put this team any lower than number 2, Michigan Wolverines. 13-1, as high as number 2, as low as 14. Is that fucking correct? There's no way that's correct. That has to be a typo. I am lying to y'all. There's no way we were 14th last season. 13-game win streak last season. We know how it ended. Let's take a look. Am I right? Yeah, I was lying to you. It was 8th as what they were lowest opening the season versus Colorado State. We know what they did, right? Do I have to run down the history? I'll do it anyways. There once was a team in the Big Ten that beat up on all their Big Ten competition with a physical style of running the football down your throats and playing good defense. That's what Michigan did in the regular season. They did this to the team, to the Penn States of the world. They did this to the Ohio States of the world, to the Nebraskas, Illinois, Marylands, Iowas. They did it to everybody. They didn't have a very close game in the regular season. You can point to Illinois, certainly, gave them a run for their money. Maryland wasn't easy, but it was a season of domination, which all came crashing down in the playoffs. They did everything right. They did everything right, but when they needed to become an explosive passing offense, they made too many mistakes. Multiple pick sixes in the college football semifinal led to their downfall, to the Cinderella story, TCU Horned Frogs, and their season ended in disappointment after starting 13-0. Taking a look at their team stats. They ran the ball incredibly well. 5th best in the country at 238.9 yards a game. Protected the football, obviously. That style of play leads to low turnovers. That's what we saw here. 5th in the country at just 10 on the season. On 14 games too. Did an incredibly good job of protecting the football until the college football semifinal. 24th in total yards, 6th in points per game. Did not give up a lot of sacks. You could say, though, for how little they threw the football, more than you may expect. A small argument there. Defensively, certainly, I would argue top 10 defense in the country. 6th in yards per game, 292. 7th in they stuffed the run. That's what Michigan did last season. 97.9 rushing yards per game in the Big Ten, might I add. 16.1 points per game allowed, 7th best in the country. This was a great defense, okay? They got after the quarterback, 2.64 sacks per game, 34th in the country. 20th in, against the pass. I mean, when you give up less than 200 passing yards and less than 100 rushing yards, you're an elite defense, point blank. Same exact takeaways as Ohio State, 18. Let's take a look at what they lost. And I don't want to disrespect any of these guys. I think offensively, Ronnie Bell was their number 1 receiver, without a doubt. Luke Schoonmaker was a valuable pass catcher for them because they didn't have many explosive guys. So over the middle of the field, guys like Luke Schoonmaker made a lot of big plays. And then offensively, this offensive line is the strength of Michigan. That's the core, the heart, the soul of this team. They lost their center. They lost Ryan Hayes. Both critical pieces of that offensive line. Jake Moody, I rarely put kickers up here, but when you're Jake Moody, you belong on this list. He made a lot of big kick. I think he made the game-winning kick against Illinois, unless I'm just having a fucking vision about that because it's 6 a.m. I watched this man, Jake Moody, win Michigan games, make big, big field goals, okay? So that's a big loss. I don't care. It's the little things that, ask Ohio State if they would have liked to have Jake Moody. They'd probably be national champions right now. That's a big loss for Michigan. Mozzie Smith, Mike Morris, both key, stuffing the run was the name of Michigan's game last season. Losing those two guys definitely hurt in that endeavor. DJ Turner going to the NFL, Bengals, I believe, 2nd round. So, they lost key role players, I'd say. No guys who just really, man, how are we going to replace this guy? But a lot of guys that contributed in major ways to Michigan last season. Taking a look at their offense, a lot to be said about JJ McCarthy. I'll say this. He's not a Heisman player. He's not close to a Heisman player. He's not a top 10 quarterback in the country, but he does a lot of good things. He makes very few mistakes unless he's playing TCU. He protects the football. He adds he adds a layer to their running attack. How good can he be as a thrower? I would say not very good because he doesn't have the weapons. I don't think Michigan has the pieces around JJ McCarthy for him to throw to for 3,000 yards. I think Michigan can win. I think they can go undefeated again this season, doing the exact same thing they did last season. JJ McCarthy does not have to be a Heisman player because you know why? They have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, the best tandem in the country. It's not close. I don't like saying that, but it's not close here. They had over 2,600 yards combined and 28 touchdowns, and that's with Blake Corum missing time. I mean, Blake Corum could win the Heisman. If he goes down, Donovan Edwards could win the Heisman for all I know. Incredibly explosive. Uh, Michigan's known for running the football. And when you have two top 10 running backs in the country in the same backfield at the same time, it's very easy to do that. So I think Michigan, we can mention the pass catchers here, Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson, having to, step up and, take over some of Ronnie Bell's production. Colston Loveland, hopefully, can replace Luke Schoonmaker and have a breakout season. What would a breakout season for him be? I don't know, maybe fucking 400 yards, but they're not built to air it out because they don't have the weapons. They are going to continue to run the football and hell, average maybe even more rushing yards than they did last season. Be top 5 in the country for all I know. But they don't have to change up anything offensively because they have a winning formula in the Big Ten. Defensively, I said this was a top 10 defense last season. I see more of the same. Point me to a weakness on this defense because it's not the front seven. Certainly not the front seven. I mean, Josiah Stewart, Jalen Harrell, 17.5 tackles for a loss combined, 7 sacks combined. The interior with Chris Jenkins. I mean, it's not the linebacking group, certainly. Michael Barrett, Junior Colston, incredibly talented between the two of them. Ernest Hausman, 54 tackles for him. It's not the secondary. Will Johnson getting a lot of hype. Mike Sanders still. I really like his game. I really like his aggressiveness. He makes big play after big play. Josh Wallace, transfer, 8 pass defender for him last season. Rod Moore, 4 interceptions. I mean, they don't have weakness. They have the players to play the type of football they want to play, and they have a proof in the last 2 seasons with 1 regular season loss in the Big Ten. They have all the proof they need that it's incredibly effective. They've gone 4-0 the last 2 seasons against Penn State and Ohio State. That's their biggest competition. If they can just do that for a 3rd straight year, they'll be back in the playoff and the national championship conversation. Taking a look at Georgia. We all know Georgia was going to be number 1. If you didn't think they were going to be number 1, I don't know what to tell you. Go watch golf or something. Georgia has won 16 straight games. They were not unranked last season. First off, I need to do a better job of fucking going over and reviewing this shit. They were not unranked last season. I don't know what to tell you. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. Let's get past this. Well, should I tell you Georgia won every game, or do you want to just look at it for yourself? Not easy schedule. I'll say that. Certainly, people will say a lot of things about Georgia's schedule this season, but last season, I mean, hell, they beat the number 1 team in the country at that time. They beat the SEC West champions, LSU, handily. They beat Will Levis. They beat Anthony Richardson. They beat Spencer Rattler. They beat Bo Nix. I mean, you want me to go down the list here? They beat Will Rogers. I mean, not an easy schedule last season. Georgia, the Missouri game was close. Let's talk about that. Georgia had to come back in the regular season, down 2 possessions in the 4th quarter. They won that game. Would it have changed anything about their season? I don't think so. I mean, if they would have lost that game, they would have just bounced back and rattled off, what would have been, hell, 10 in a row, whatever it would have been. So, I mean, I don't know. Say what you will. Georgia had the perfect mix, because they were not as good defensively as they were a year before. They lost a lot of goddamn talent to the NFL. So what did they do? They became a top 5 offense in the country. If you don't believe me, look at the stats. 501 yards per game, 41 points per game, and Stetson Bennett never hit the turf. A sack every 2 games is what the case was for Georgia last season. Taking a look defensively, they were the best rush defense in the country. 77.1 yards per game, 14 points allowed. In the SEC, playing Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker, Will Rogers, Spencer Rattler, hell, Max Duggan, CJ Stroud, Jaden Daniels. They gave up 14 points. And here, let me point out some things to you guys, because Georgia went undefeated last season, and they won the national championship game 65-7. They were 55th in the country in turnovers, total turnovers offensively. They were 59th in the country in takeaways. They were 49th in the country in sacks. And they were 54th in the country in defending the pass. They were middle of the pack in 4 categories, and they went undefeated and won the national championship by 58 points. They have room for improvement across the board here. That's scary. Let's get into what they lost, because it's a lot. And the hypocrite in me wants to acknowledge the fact that, similar to Ohio State, they also lost their quarterback in a big part of their offensive line. However, we'll get into it, but Stetson Bennett, what is there to say besides the fact that he was a Heisman candidate last season and led Georgia to being one of the best offenses in the country? He was clutch to no end. He made the big plays against Ohio State. He came back against Missouri. He did everything they needed to. Kenny McIntosh, not the traditional. He's not Nick Chubb. He's not Sony Michel. He's not DeAndre Swift. He was Kenny McIntosh. And, he helped make their passing offense as deadly as it was. Over 1,300 yards from scrimmage and 12 touchdowns. Kearis Jackson, one of my favorite Bulldogs ever. I remember watching, it was like 2020, he had like over 500 yards. Just, I don't know. He was one of the guys I always wanted to blow up and be like a number 1 receiver, high NFL draft pick. That never happened. He's in the NFL now for the Titans, but, one of my favorite Georgia players ever. He is gone. Darnell Washington gone. I mentioned already Broderick Jones, Warren McClendon. I mean, no sacks allowed for either of them. I mean, that's massive, guys. And I'm not trying to downplay that, because, when you have 2 guys out of 5 and both of them are perfect as far as not giving up a sack, and you take both of them out of that equation, it's incredibly tough to try and shuffle that around and find guys who can even be comparable to what they did for Georgia's offensive line. So take that for what you will. Jalen Carter gone, Nolan Smith, Bear Alexander, I mentioned, transfer to USC, Robert Beal, NFL. So that's 4. That's 4 of just their defensive line. However, I mentioned Georgia was not great at getting pressure last season. Not to Georgia's standards, at least, certainly. So they lost a lot of talented players, but they wasn't popping up in the sack numbers. So it's interesting. It's interesting. Keely Ringo obviously gone. Remember when I said he was the best quarterback or cornerback in the draft? That was fun. And then Chris Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders. What do they have left? What does this offense consist of now that there was a mass exodus? Well, Carson Beck is the guy. When I say the guy, what does that mean? Well, he is, in my opinion, the most important player in college football. Why do I say that? Because if he is If he's good, Georgia's going undefeated and is winning their 31st straight game in January sometime. That's if he's good. If he's great, same thing, but in more dominant fashion. That's all he has to do, guys. That's because you know why? Take a look around. Kendall Milton averaged, I don't know, 7 yards per carry last season. I have no idea how to say dude's first name. I'm just call him Edwards. Is going to be either one of these guys. You could say in a similar situation to Ohio State, they should rely more heavily on the run game. But you know why they don't have to? Is because Georgia has the best receiving core they've ever had. Ever. In the history of Georgia. In the history of Georgia football, this is the best receiving core they've ever had. Brock Bowers has a case for the best player in college football. I think he's the best tight end in the history of college football already, without having played his third season. I think you could say that. I think after the season, it's going to be set in stone. He's just that good. Dominic Lovett, transfer from Missouri. Is he the number one receiver? It's going to be a fight between him and Ladd McConkey, but I think certainly from a skill set perspective, the best receiver Georgia's had in I don't know how many years do you want to say? Ladd McConkey from last season, nearly 900 total yards, 9 total touchdowns. He did it all. He did it all for Georgia last season. Ra Thomas from Michigan State. He has some issues, we'll call it. So does MJR, Marcus Jack Saint or Marcus Rosemary Jackson, whatever his name is. Both of them have some issues, but neither of them have been dismissed from the team. And both of them are still listed on the depth chart. So I'm going to assume that both these guys are still playing for them. Here's the scary thing. Both of these guys could disappear, and Georgia would still have a top 5 receiver core in the country because Arian Smith averaged, what is that, 28 yards per catch last season. What do you want me to say? This all comes down to Carson Beck because they have the weapons to be the best in the country. I mean, you take a look for yourself, guys. It's not hard to put together. Carson Beck is the key that drives the Georgia engine, and depending on how good he is basically just depending on how easily they win the national championship this season. Taking a look at their defense, this is actually pretty interesting because, the last 2 seasons, they've just lost so much talent to the NFL. You almost want to say, well, what do they have left? Well, let's take a look at it. I'd say the strength of this team is with the linebackers and the safeties. So let's take a look at the bottom corners of your screen, left and right-hand side. Starting on the left-hand side, JDJ and Smail Mondon, both with over 70 tackles last season, over 8 tackles for loss, and JDS with the ability to get after the quarterback at a high rate. On the right-hand side, Malachi Starks and Javon Bullard. Javon Bullard, the ability to get after the quarterback from the DB position. Very interesting. Malachi Starks is all freshman, all American, I think. 7-pass defender for him. 2 interceptions for the both of them. On the defensive line, Michael Williams looks to be the premier pass rusher for the Bulldogs. And the interior of the defensive line, Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse, holding up that, hopefully, if you're a Georgia fan, continuing to make them the best run stuffing team in the nation. And then Chaz Chambliss. When I saw a white Georgia defender, I stopped for a second. I'm like, is this history? Because that was a shocker to me. But hey, shout out to Georgia for including a white defender on their defense. That was a shocker to me. Amari Lassiter, their number 1 cornerback in the absence of Ringo, certainly an increased role for him. A lot of people would say he was already better than Ringo, and he looks to be the next premier Georgia cornerback. Tyke Smith also included here. He had 28 tackles last season. All of that to say, Georgia, out of respect, even if they didn't have the roster they had, I still would have put them at number 1. The problem is they are in a position to have the best offense they've ever had. They have a change at quarterback, and they have a change at offensive coordinator. Todd Monken is gone. He went to the NFL to coach the Ravens offense. So a lot of change, possibly in the way they play offense, but if they fail, it will not be because they don't have the talent, because they have the talent to three-peat. Will they put that together? Hell, I think so. If you want my opinion, yes, Georgia's winning their third straight national championship. With that being said, it is 6 a.m. I'm tired. I'm sweaty. Thanks for watching, though. If you're still here, thank you. I really do appreciate it. I am so looking forward to not doing these videos anymore and taking fucking. Oh my God, it took so long to put this shit together. We're finally done, though. We are finally done. I'm just going to do strictly team spotlights for a while because that's more interesting and fun. But if you are still watching for some reason, leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you are not already. I truly do appreciate your support, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out the niggas don't know how to act.